Welcome to Dan's podcast.
This is the Redefining Plastics Podcast. Welcome to the Redefining Plastics Podcast. My name's Justin Riney. Appreciate everybody for all of the support. I'm going to do a quick infomercial to start off, which I hate. I hate self-promotion, but it would be very helpful to me and to the reach of this podcast if you liked and subscribed on YouTube, or if you left a quick review on Apple Podcasts. The more people can see positive reviews, the more it gets dispersed to a wider audience. Because really what I want is to have this conversation with consumers. Right now, a bunch of plastics people are watching this, and a lot of plastics people like what I'm saying. We need to have conversations outside of plastics too. So with that out of the way, we got a guest today. The farthest away guest I've ever had, by far, Simon Van Leuven from Vanden Recycling in Australia. Welcome to the show today. Why don't you tell the folks who you are, where you're from, what you do, and why you're here.
Hey, Justin, thank you so much for having me on your show. Watched a few episodes. You've got had many awesome guests. So, yeah, joining you all the way from down under is awesome. So thank you, first of all, for that. Well, look, I'm the Australian director of Vanden Recycling, and our business is a plastic commodity trading business, mainly focused on recycled polymers. Our mission is to build the world's largest recycled plastic commodity business. We are a global operation. In the last 2 years, we've started to expand into the USA, and we're doing a lot more work over there at the moment, which I'm really excited about. We've been leading that from Australia, so spent a bit of time in your neck of the woods in the last couple of years, and that's been awesome. But look, I'm a typical Australian country lad, I guess you can say. We grew up in a small country town in South Australia, and town of 5,000 people, and I now reside in Melbourne with a couple of million people, and somehow found my way into the recycling industry. My background was never plastic recycling. My background was building, and I kind of fell into the plastic recycling business.
You and everybody else.
Yeah, exactly right. Through my brother, Damien, who started Vanden back in 2005 with his really great friend, John Carapitas. And those two started Vanden, grew what it is today, and dragged me along for the journey at some stage along the way.
So when you fell into this, when your brother approached you and said, I'm going to start a recycling company, what was your first reaction to that?
Yeah, well, I guess because I knew what he was doing from the start, it made it a little bit easier to follow along. So, his journey into this is a bit of a unique Australian style story. I mean, he was at university doing an international business degree, and as part of that, he had to do 6 months overseas, and he chose to do that in Shanghai. And they were out one night at a bar, having a few drinks. Found out people were making money trading plastic around the world. And like all young people, you see these opportunities as a massive way to earn a lot of money. And before he knew it, he rented an apartment in Hong Kong and he started. And not long after that, he rang his good mate, John, and said, listen, I've started this company. We're going to travel the world. We're going to buy and sell plastic. Do you want to come and join me? And for John, that sounded pretty exciting too. So he jumped on a plane and went and joined him. And this is back in 2005. And then those two built that from about 2005 to 2010, 11, 12, when they started talking to me each time they'd come home at Christmas time. It'll be like, hey, we want to start an Australian office. What do you think? And then, eventually 2013, the opportunity was presented itself to jump in with them. So a little bit of a crazy idea. I obviously knew nothing about plastic. And as a builder, I think you always had to learn on the job and learn as you go. So, it's been an incredible journey. And I do have to say that I think the people have made it a fantastic journey too.
I think the one thing that I constantly say on here is the people in plastics are the reason why I'm still here.
Yep.
Because the people are just great. Like, honestly, I've been in this industry going on 12 years, and I've had maybe 2 or 3 bad experiences in 12 years,
Yep.
which is saying something, because there's a lot of people, but it's a small industry, right? It's kind of like a family.
Yep.
You run into the same people at the shows all the time, the same people. They just move around company to company. It's a small ecosystem. But so, Vanden, do you have assets, or are you really just trading? Are you just moving material around?
Yeah. So mostly trading. We have a factory in the UK.
Okay.
We've just made some announcements that factory's shutting. So there's nothing new there. It was a really integral part of building out our service offering in the UK, but now really doesn't account for a lot of our volume that we trade globally. So, and the current economic conditions sort of brought that to a head, that for the volume of material that was going through there compared to the rest of the trade business, and the fact that we've got such a aggressive growth plan ahead of us, it was really about, the deployment of our capability in other areas, to be honest. So the short answer is, yes, we did have an asset on the ground there in the UK. We don't have that now, and it is mostly trading. So
Okay.
everything from baled material, flakes, regrinds, and then resin and food grade resin as well now, which is a
Okay.
big part of what we do.
So, Basel Convention, there's a lot of consternation about moving waste material around
Yep.
the world.
Yep.
Typically, you have to make something a value add in order to move it from one country to the other. Is that kind of how you're working that system? Not trying to implicate you're working around or you're breaking any kind of rules. I just, we're not a part of it. Like, we're
Yep.
not signatories here in the U.S., so I don't really know as much about the Basel Convention. So I don't know if you can shed some light on that for me and kind of help me from the Australian perspective, at least.
Yeah, so Justin, it's a great question, because the operating space that we work in every day is highly regulated.
Mm-hmm.
And if I talk from the Australian perspective, like many countries, a lot of our plastic waste would go to near neighbours like Southeast Asia to be reprocessed, and then obviously over the last 5-6 years, those market places have changed a little bit. A lot of plastic waste used to go to China, and that stopped, and then it started to flow into other countries in Southeast Asia. What the Australian government did around about 3 years ago was implemented a ban on plastic waste exports, and they brought in a licensing system. So the initial phase of that ban was you could continue to export baled commodities out of Australia to any country around the world, so long as it met a specification, it had minimum contamination thresholds. You have to list every supplier on that license, what the quality controls were in place to maintain that level of quality, and then you also had to list the country that the material was being sent to and the consignees in those countries. So what the Australian government did was they brought in that as phase one, and that was a really big step for the industry. It was a challenge. There's no doubt about that. It was a challenge. But the biggest challenge came in phase two, which they implemented only 12 months after the initial phase, where the material had to be further processed. So the regulation went from single stream material in bales to flake, regrind, or resin.
Okay.
So within 12 months, the industry had a massive, bell curve adjustment to meet that regulation change. At the same time, the Australian government made a lot of funding available to build new assets, put more assets on the ground. so that we could turn those commodities into flakes, resin, and regrind, and then export them as such if we couldn't consume it all here in Australia. I think the gap between phase 1 and phase 2, and I think the government's recognised it now, that was a really big step and it was way too fast. They weren't prepared for it. And then you've got the compliance side of it, Justin, which is, there are still operators out there that don't want to operate within the regulations. And if they're not being held to account, then all you're doing is undermining all the legitimate operators that are in the marketplace, and then undermining the investment that you're putting on the ground as well. So the Australian government made a really aggressive step change. Some would suggest it was too aggressive, too fast, but it's there now. The industry's adapted. I won't say it's been easy, it's been difficult, but the industry has adapted, and we've now got some great recycling assets on the ground that I don't think we would have had if the government didn't make some kind of move in that area.
Are you dealing directly with Australian government officials, or is that somebody else within your organization that's kind of handling all that?
It's a job that I'm responsible for as the director for the Australian operations. So, constant dialogue with the government about different things. We have some great peak industry bodies here too, where they're often seeking an opinion about something, or you can give feedback on something. So I think that's been one of the great things is access to the right people. You can offer feedback.
Do they listen to the feedback?
That's
my problem here in the U.S.
Yeah,
I got to tell you.
The honest answer, Justin, is it's been difficult.
Okay.
Yep. And I think everyone in the industry would say some of that feedback has been difficult. There's certainly been a bunch of non-compliant activity that hasn't been followed up. And when I say not followed up, what I probably should say is perhaps not followed up with the feedback coming back to the industry about it. That they may be working on it in the background, but I think the industry deserves, to know that these things are being addressed. And I think
everybody's got to play by the same rules, right? Like,
that's exactly
it seems
right.
like, and let me just kind of give my perspective based on what you just said, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. It seems like the government's trying to do the right thing, because I don't think anybody wants any of our plastic waste exported to Malaysia just to end up being dumped into a river somewhere. Nobody wants that. I don't want that. You don't want that, because it's a commodity, right? You would love to be able to get it and sell it and make money on it.
Yep.
The problem is when you get the unintended consequences of not everybody's going to follow this system, because not everybody's a good actor. And with harmonized codes and the way that you can hide shipments by not declaring this is plastic waste, kind of stuff happens all the time.
Yep.
So if you don't have a solid framework for it, it's very easy for status quo to continue. And then the people that want to do the right thing end up having no ability to compete, because you're doing things the right way, and then you're having to pay extra. It costs more. And then bad actors are out there just shipping it for free practically. And so that, in that way, you're very similar to what we're dealing with in the U.S. I would say that our countries are very different, but in that way, dealing with legislators, it sounds like you're very similar.
Yeah, I definitely think that is very similar, even just from some of my experience, jumping across the Pacific there. So, I think the intentions are always, or have been, the right intentions. I also think maybe the government here didn't understand the complexity of the industry, and probably to a point further, who were the companies that were actually moving a lot of the material, because I don't think they realized how much trading businesses are used to move material, because they have access to different markets as well. So I think that surprised them a lot in terms of who moved the volume and who was doing what. So look, a big learning curve for them. I mean, it's a whole department that had to be started from scratch. And plastics was just one part of the waste export bans. I mean, tires was the other part of that. And, you know, I can only imagine how difficult the tire part was because, we just heard horror story after horror story about, warehouses that were stacked with tires and people renting a warehouse and filling them up with tires. And so, in that regard, I kind of understand if resources were and have been a bit stretched. So, I mean, they had a massive undertaking. But yeah, I'm sure on reflection, there's a lot of things that they could do differently, and they are trying to do some of them. So we'll see.
So I guess where my mind goes with this is because obviously I'm in the U.S. Most of my conversations are focused on North America, either Canada, U.S., Mexico. You're playing in that space, but you're also playing in Australia. What are the main similarities? And then we can go to the differences between how plastic recycling is done here versus Australia.
Yeah. So I think similarities. Let's start at a grassroots level, I guess. So similarities would be collection systems from the curbside into a MRF on the recycling part of it are very, very similar. I walk into a MRF either, for the listeners, a material recovery facility, those that don't know the acronym, but yeah, I walk into MRFs here in Australia and in the USA. They're all kind of the same. Some of them will have optical sorting, some of them are using robots now. There's still an element of people on those lines sorting and hand cleaning different elements of the commodities as they go through. So I think those things are very similar. The curbside collections are similar, but over there you guys also have dirty MRFs where you're extracting recyclables from the waste. Mm-hmm. We don't have a lot of that. We don't have any of that in Australia, actually. So in Australia we have, the waste bin and then the recycling bin. They're rolling out more options for recycling in Australia. So generally, the recycling bin is a commingled recycling bin where you can have
stream.
Single stream. In Victoria, in Australia, they've rolled out a glass bin to get glass out of that stream, so glass doesn't end up in the cardboard and the paper.
Yeah, that's a real problem everywhere, and I don't think a lot of people think about it.
Yeah, that's right. And then it's also a problem in the plastic too because it becomes impregnated into the plastic. So I think those things are reasonably similar. Probably the biggest difference we have on the collection side is every single state across Australia now has, a CRV scheme that you guys call over there, the container deposit scheme. Every single state in Australia has one of those. It's a fantastic system. It's very engaging for consumers. They feel like they're getting something back. So, that program's rolled out really, really well. I guess, in the US, you've got California, which has the CRV scheme over there. And a couple
Iowa. There are states, but it is interspersed. It's just all over the place.
Yeah. So I think those things are really, really similar. And the language is all very, very similar. So, the main topics are always, throughput and managing throughput, managing waste. So throughput and waste are two big economic drivers in a material recovery facility, and then about commodity value and obviously making sure that everyone's producing great commodities that have value and getting the most value they can for them. So yeah, it is a big economic machine. The industry employs, millions of people, and most of all, the people in there, whether they're working on the line or managing the commodities or they're a supervisor, whatever they're doing in the material recovery facilities, they're all passionate about the same thing. And that's kind of what I like as well.
So I would say that one other thing that we have in common is land mass in space.
Yes, we do.
Like I get in arguments a lot where people are like, why can't we do things more like Europe? Why can't we be exactly like Europe? I'm like, well, Europe is very condensed. All of your population centers are very, for the most part,
Yep.
very concentrated. In countries like the US and Australia, the space between people is way more than most. And that makes recycling hard, right? Because you got to get one truck doing a milk run going 3 times as far as something that would be happening in Europe just because of the distance between people.
Yep.
And so that makes it more expensive and it makes it more difficult. And there's so many different reasons for why our systems are going to be different than Europe. I still think there are things that we can take from Europe. I think, I've said this before, but I think single stream was the single biggest mistake that the U.S. made when it comes to recycling. I think if we would have made it early on, hey, here's 6 bins, you put your 6 different things in there and made that practical where people, that's what they knew at the beginning, that would be way easier. It's very difficult to go from, hey, just dump everything into a bin. Now I'm going to send you 6 bins and here are all the different days that these are going to get picked up. That's way different. And it's way harder now.
Yeah, and the other complication with that too, Justin, which I think people here in Melbourne, Victoria are realising because we've got another bin that's been added to the system, is if you're an apartment building, where are you going to put all the extra bins?
Yeah.
So that's one thing I think that's been noticeable in terms of feedback you hear around the place. But I mean, the better things can be separated, the easier they are to recycle. And then when you come back to the economics of it, when they get to the material recovery facility, throughput can be higher because the waste cost is going to be less too. So those two go hand in hand. But that I think the space that we have and the distance between towns and cities, that is very, very similar for us.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw out some numbers for the U.S. and just here's kind of where we're at right now. And then I want your perspective on kind of where you think Australia is compared to that. So in the U.S. over the last decade, 50% reduction in volumes of curbside recycling because people are less engaged. They're less likely to be recycling because they don't think it works. Or there's a myriad other reasons, but I think that's the big one.
Yep.
The other thing is only 7% of recycled material or actual recycling that happens in the U.S. comes to curbside.
Yep.
93% of it's all distribution centers or commercial hubs or businesses collecting and recycling their material. Where do you think that compares with Australia? Just high level. I'm not asking for specific numbers, just based on your experience. Like, where do you think that's at?
Yeah, so I think our recycling rates in Australia are significantly higher. And I think the main reason for that is most Australians are reasonably engaged with recycling. I also think the container deposit schemes or the CRV schemes that we run here.
It's a great system.
Yeah, so I think those two, I mean, whilst I'm saying our recovery rates or our recycling rates are better, for Australia, they're still not good enough because we still just don't have enough recovery. We don't have enough, collection systems. So I think if Australia was to look in the mirror and go, are we happy with where we are? The answer would be no. But we know we're doing better than some other places. Still, that's not a reason to rest on your laurels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of running down that same path, the biggest problem for recyclers that I talk to in the US is consistent demand for plastic recycled content. Like
Yep.
locked in, long term. I know that if I collect it, I sort it, I process it, somebody's going to buy it.
Yep.
You're moving material all over the world.
Yep.
Where's your head at in that discussion? Do you feel like we need long-term contracts to drive growth and make recycling work? Or is there enough of a commodity market that we should be able to move this stuff efficiently throughout the globe? We just need to connect the dots better than we are today. Kind of where's your head at on that?
Yeah, so I think if we look at, let's say choose Europe, for example, Justin, that they have regulated with penalties for not using recycled content. That is a big driver in ensuring that recycled content is put into products. And we are now seeing, many other countries filing in line with very aggressive ERP schemes and mandated recycled content targets. So I think where those markets have got those rules and regulations in place, and I don't know if they've got the balance of them right.
I don't think they have, but I know where you're going with it.
Yeah. But I think the concept is right. Whether the balance is right is another discussion.
Yep.
And then you've also got to, if you're going to go down that path, which many countries are doing, you've got to be able to have a penalty system that is actually enforced, because otherwise people will just find a way to work around it. That's always been the case, and it always will be. So I think we need some kind of mechanism there. We're seeing at the moment with global trade, in particular, the amount of cheap prime that's in the marketplace. If we think back, 5-10 years ago, recycled polymer was a substitute for prime, and it was a substitute for economic value. Now, when it comes to recycled content now, it's in most cases more expensive than the prime or the virgin material. And when you get into an economic period like we are now, where it's challenging and margins are diminished for everyone, some are arguing that they have no choice but to go back to prime instead of recycled, and then that affects some of the market metrics to drive more use of recycled content. So I think there's a few things on the regulation space that we should look at. We need to be careful about it, but I'd say watch this space. But that is an area that we could look at.
Because I point to the paper industry all the time.
Yep.
They came together as a group and said, if we want to keep selling paper as a packaging material, we have to get better at recycling. We have to solve, because people are climbing the Empire State Building with big signs that say, save the rainforest, save the trees, ban paper. And I think they took that seriously, and they went and they said, all right, we got to put our money into this, and we've got to solve for it. And they've done a phenomenal job at really increasing the recycle rate for paper, because the numbers can't be touched by any other industry. And it's because they put their own money into it and they came together as a group. I have not seen that same type of effort from plastics, specifically in the U.S. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. Like you mentioned that recycled polymer was cheaper in Australia than virgin. That's never been the case here. At least as long as I've been in the industry, because I've been in the industry post-fracking. And post-fracking, our virgin prices are always going to be cheaper than recycled content because we have such low cost to produce here. And so when it gets to Australia, it's probably not as cheap because you got export and you got every other reason why. I don't even think there's any resin production in Australia, is there?
Yeah, no, there's no there is some limited resin production here. Most of a lot of the big scale stuff has definitely wound back in the last few years. I probably should correct myself on recycled content being cheaper. That was definitely more like 10 years ago,
Yeah.
than in the last 5 years, I guess. But it
That
was
problem
always
is exacerbated now, though, right? Because
yeah
the
yeah
markets are even lower now than they were 5 years ago. And
yeah
it's a cycle. Whenever we hit this bottom and trough, you start to see a lot of recyclers closing down
yep
because there's just not enough demand. And it's all because virgin prices are cheaper than any kind of recycled content. And it's
yeah
just structurally that way.
yeah. It's almost like the prime producers need the recycling industry, but they're kind of punishing the recycling industry at the moment with the price of the cheap prime. It's kind
Could
of
not
like
agree more.
they got to be working together, because if they're not, one's belting the other one over their head and shifting them out of the marketplace, so to speak. And
And that's what paper did. Paper
yeah,
got together with the recycling companies and said, I'm going to give you floor price 25-year contracts for all this material. If markets get below this, I'm still going to pay you that floor price, because you got to make sure you can operate
yep,
and reinvest. Go find me material, and then increase the recycle rate. So that symbiotic relationship was there. That's not the case in plastics. And I am really advocating strongly for it has to be the case in plastics. Resin producers, which I work for one, I'm not going to talk about who I work for, but we need the recycling industry, to your point. It has to be a symbiotic relationship. It has to work together. We have to support the recycling industry, and we have to make it so they survive. Right now, it's a hard conversation because nobody has money. Nobody's making money in these markets. But this is exactly when we have to have these conversations. Otherwise, we're just never going to improve. It's a nasty cycle.
yeah,
We got to solve it.
yeah. I agree. I agree on that. There needs to be closer working relationship. I mean, I'm not in the paper business, but you can definitely see that market is a far more mature market than the plastic market. And there needs to be some level of collaboration there, a little bit faster than what's going on. Otherwise, you will just see in these economic times more recycling businesses having to close because of the diminishing margins. It's a tough game.
And whenever the brands come back and say, you know what, we care about sustainability again, and we want to start buying PCR content, people are going to say, well, there's nobody here to do it because you weren't buying when the market was low.
Yeah.
I think this is a whole industry effort. All the way to the end user has to be involved in this. And right now, it is so disjointed, and everybody's out for themselves. And when everybody's out for themselves, like the whole Beautiful Mind thing, you ever watch that movie?
Yeah.
Where they're trying to get with the girls at the bar. And he's like, well, if everybody goes for the most beautiful one, and in this case, the cheapest material, everybody's going to lose. But if we all work together and we all focus on maybe not the best option, but maybe the second best option or the third best option, it's better for everybody in the long run. And that's not true capitalism. And I think a lot of people get pissy when I talk about this stuff. But this is what we have to do. And if we don't do it, what are we doing? It's just all talk. And I can't be a part of that. I don't want to be a part of it. I want to be a part of an industry that says that we care and actually does things and actually makes things happen. And if we're not going to do that, I'm going to stop talking about this because I think it's a waste of time.
Yeah, and I think for me, what especially in the last 2 years, I've been going back and forth to the States a lot, and between Australia and the US, there's a couple of real big similarities here. There are some companies that are investing really strongly in this area, and they've got great people. They're investing in technology. They're really trying to make a difference. And we almost need to champion them to go, here are the examples, and probably put them in lights a little bit, and these are the companies that are doing these things really, really well. There are some that are really strongly vertically integrated, but everyone's got to get a feed along the way.
Yeah.
Right back to the truck driver driving the truck to collect it, and so on and so forth. And one of the things I've talked about before is actually when you break it down to the bin being made to be put on the curbside, the truck coming to pick it up, going to a MRF, the material being sorted, recovered, sold to someone, it gets trucked again. The amount of money that's in that supply chain is insane. When you add it up,
really
it's
is
insane. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think not a lot of people understand that. And they the amount of conversations I have with big brands, and they're like, well, it's waste. It should be cheap. And then you walk through that and they're like, okay, here's every step in the value chain.
Mm.
When you compare it to virgin, you got natural gas coming through pipeline. Once it gets to the cracker, it goes through pipeline or large vessels. All of that is cheap.
Yep.
You don't have milk runs of trucks that's really inefficient. Because let's be honest, recycling is an inefficient system. And I don't have a solution to make it more efficient. There's no, you can't make a pipeline where it's going to these pneumatic tubes where you just throw your recycled content in there and then just ends up at the MRF sorted. That's just never going to work. There's always going to be additional costs. So you have to make it economically feasible for every step in the way. And until we have that collaboration and that transparency, like they did in the paper industry, this is a lost cause to get to a better, bigger scale. But I'm going to keep pushing this thing until the day I die, because I want more and more and more material to be diverted from a landfill. Because this is commodity. That's your whole business, is moving this stuff around the world. There's a value to it.
Yep. We
just have to get better at it. And we have to really work together to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like you said, Justin, I mean, when you think about how light these commodities are as loose materials collected in the back of trucks and things like that, you're right. It's the cost per ton or the cost per kilo is quite high. And especially when we're talking about countries like Australia and the US, where, those collection systems, there can be some distance between some of them. So, trying to peel back costs in that and to create value in that supply chain at that level is really important. And I don't know how more efficient we can make that, but certainly some effort's got to go into that somehow. And then, I think one of the really cool things I'm seeing is the use of tech and AI in a lot of these MRFs now. That's something that I've been super impressed with of just how well, you can train some of the optical sorting or the robots to pick certain containers, and whether that's by shape, by size, by brand. That kind of technology is going to help add further value back into that. But I mean, this is a big problem to solve, and it is going to take everyone in that supply chain. And I guess the example probably from the UK, where they've got a packaging recovery note, which is essentially a packaging tax, where when a brand puts a product on the market, they have to contribute to the fund for that material to be recycled, and that fund can be drawn down on from recycling companies. And in some cases, it can be worth a couple of $100 a ton. So, that's a pretty good head start for the recycler. But again, there's been some question marks and some questioning of the scheme and having that refined a little bit. So, the one comment I hear all the time is, should the government be the ones running those schemes? Are they capable of doing it? If you put it in the hands of the brands, some people are like, oh, well, the brand shouldn't be running it. So you end up in this crossfire.
Yeah,
of who
it's
should-
tough, right?
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, you didn't think that we got the balance right of EPR, because I think based on this conversation so far, we both agree that EPR schemes are good solutions to increase collection of all materials. We're not even talking just plastics. I think
Yep.
EPR is a good thing if it's balanced right.
Yeah.
Where do you think that balance is off from your perspective?
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you, this is an example I can give from here, Justin.
Mhm.
So, these aren't actual numbers, but they'll be pretty close to it. So if you're going to run a container deposit scheme and you're aiming for a, let's say an 80% recovery rate, and the cost to recover those bottles, for example, might be, to run the scheme, to give the money back to the consumer. Let's say the scheme's going to cost 50 cents a bottle, so that cost goes onto the bottle itself. But then your recovery rate's only 60 or 70%. So what's
You're already
happening with
upside down. Yeah.
Yeah, right. What's happening with the rest of that funding? Where's that going? Okay. So there are challenges in some of that too. I mean, there'll be people that'll argue that, hey, it's not a bad way to make a bit of extra profit. You can put your price up 50 cents a bottle and you're not going to have to pay for the recovery on 30% of them because our recovery rate's only 70%. The cynics out there would be giving it that angle. But that's a bit of a reality for the consumer for paying for something that then is not being fully recovered. So, that balance, the economics of that, the cost of that is an interesting topic.
So pros, so producer responsibility organizations or brands running EPR.
Yep.
I see the value in it because if you are a brand that's going to have to pay into the system, you want to have an ability to dictate how that money's invested. I do see the counter argument for somebody like in California, you've got Cal Recycle, which is a big organization that's been doing this for a long time. And for the most part, they're pretty good. I would say that it's not incredibly well run, but I think they do a better job than most in tracking and managing the system. So there's arguments to be made for both groups. I think the counter argument for the pro and the brands running it is there's a certain cabal of brands that started this CAA, so Circular Action Alliance in the US, which I think is a good organization for the most part. But only certain types of brands, it's like the food packaging brands, are on that board. And now they're getting sued by distributors in Oregon saying that they didn't have a seat at the table and they're having to pay into the system. And so it's like, no matter which direction you go, somebody's going to be unhappy.
Yeah.
That's a good example in the US. The big appliance packaging folks don't have a seat at the table, and they're getting huge bills for expanded polystyrene packaging to move refrigerators around.
Yep.
And they're saying, well, what other option do you want us to do? We can't go to molded fiber because that's just going to be more breakage of product shipping around because it doesn't have the impact resistance that we need. There's really no other option. But I'm being charged this huge amount because you're not letting me have this conversation with you. You're not letting me be at the table. And I think the same thing would happen if it wasn't brands, if it was regulators. Because I don't know about you, but most regulators that I talk to don't understand recycling at all. And this is a small piece of their daily life, and they're not educated on it. And to be fair to them, they got to be educated on a lot of stuff. Recycling's probably not top of mind for a lot of these folks because that's not what's driving stuff for their constituents. Their constituents care about how much does it cost to buy stuff. They care about healthcare. They care about social safety nets. Recycling's probably near the bottom for a lot of these people when it comes to their hierarchy of needs. So then I just don't know how we solve for that unless if we have an open system. And I'm not seeing that open system right now. It's very much hey, this is what we're going to direct, and there's going to be a ton of unintended consequences. Just like the bills that I'm seeing in Oregon for appliance packaging when they have no other alternative that works, it's insane. And it's because there are not enough people talking, and there's not enough people with seats at the table. And I don't know how to change that. Well, and that's where, in my mind, the balance is off.
Yeah, I think having everyone at the table and talking about it, that's an important factor. You brought up another really good point there, Justin, when you talked about appliances, and in packaging in general, and it's very, very easy to, be critical of how a product's packaged.
Mm-hmm.
But I also would say to every consumer that complains about how something's packaged, I bet you if your appliance turned up and it had a dent in it or it had a scratch on it, you're going to be mighty. Yeah, you'd send it back. You'd want it replaced. So
and that's going to negate any kind of packaging that you put in there from a GHG perspective. And not even to mention, if you went from EPS to molded fiber, it makes it heavier. And it's actually going to be counterproductive from a GHG perspective.
Yeah.
And now you have a spoilage of that product. One broken washing machine is going to counter every single packaging change you make from a GHG perspective. It makes no sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the, it's the big thing that I think about a lot actually on that side of things is, packaging is designed to be fit for purpose, and everyone's doing their best to minimize the amount of plastic, packaging that is made. But there are just certain items where you can reduce it, but eliminating it becomes quite tough, completely. But coming back onto the EPR part of that, we need everyone at the table. Some of the industrial packaged items are sort of left out there and not at the table. So getting everyone at the table is always the hardest part, I think.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how these lawsuits go. Because if this lawsuit in Oregon, let's say it's successful, I don't see how California's EPR bill can go forward at that point. Because if Oregon's bill is interfering with interstate commerce, California is 1,000 times that.
Yep.
Because people are making full-on decisions for how they're going to make their packaging based on what goes into California because of the size of the market. So people are going to completely change how they do all of their packaging based on faulty information of what they think is recyclable in California. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how this works. And I don't know how all that worked in Europe, because all of these schemes in Europe and Canada, they've been around forever. I'm sure somebody challenged them at some point from a legal perspective, but they're there. So I know it can happen. And maybe the U.S. legal system is just so different that it's not going to work in the same way. And you're going to have all these lawsuits and it's just going to drag it out forever and it's never going to happen. But I don't think that's the right thing either. I think we need to have EPR, but we also need the demand on the back end. Like, I don't care how much you're going to collect. If nobody's going to buy it, what's the point?
Yeah, that's right. There's got to be some kind of pull through, which is where if it's economically monetized, somehow. I mean, I guess the European example is a rebate for displacing prime or virgin, whether that's right or not, I don't know yet. But one of the things you talk about, because I've noticed this in the US too, where there are some states that have put an EPR program in place and others that don't. One of the things Australia did, and we're probably lucky because we're only 25 million people. When you look at California as a state, how big that is compared to our population. But all the state leaders and the environment ministers all came together and all sat at the table about, regarding rolling out container deposit schemes, rolling out, the investment the industry required and the regulation that the federal government wanted to implement. The state leaders had to have buy-in on it. And like all politics, I'm sure, I know, not everyone agreed on everything, but they've got something in place. And I won't say it's, working, absolutely perfectly, but it's kind of on the right path.
It sounds better than us. That's it. The idea of 50 states coming together and agreeing on EPR or deposit bills or anything, I don't see it happening.
I think it's a big challenge.
It needs to.
Yep.
And the problem is, I worry that if we do that, what we get out of it's going to be worse than what we have now. Because we're so divided here. And getting anybody to agree on anything that's going to move the needle in a positive direction, maybe I'm just cynical. I just don't see it happening. But I think the one thing I really wanted to get your opinion on, where do you see the recycling market from a global perspective now? How has it changed? We'll just say post-tariffs. How is everything, what's the landscape and how has it changed over the last year?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to think of how I can describe it without
doom and gloom.
Without a bit of that. It's almost like you got a chessboard and you've just thrown all the chess pieces in the air. That's kind of what's happened. So, I think from the global supply chain, I mean, we're just seeing structural changes in the recycling market, and it's been a moving target, I think, since March, as different tariffs have rolled in, the tariff rates have changed from different countries. I mean, we've not seen this at this level before. So that's created a few problems. Obviously, there was a lot of material that would come from China into the US and from Southeast Asia into the US. A lot of that has stopped or has been pulled back a little bit because of the increase in the tariffs. And then, the consequence of that, because the US is a really big market for the recycling industry, then you see gluts of material in other parts of the world. And so it ends up being a little bit of a race to the bottom because, if you've got, an oversupply in some areas, then the only way you start moving oversupply is to drop your price and make it attractive. And that is a real challenge navigating that at the moment. And we have seen some decline in consumer spending. People are more careful with how they're spending their money at the moment, and there's no hiding from that. And then the cheap prime has certainly been a real challenge for the recycling industry. So globally, it's a very challenging market right now. There's no doubt about that in every polymer. Probably the polymer that maybe has some of the most stability is probably PET.
Yeah.
And I say that because it's so consumer facing.
Yeah.
That definitely has probably the most stability out of it. I mean, if you compare it to LDPE or, polyethylene and polypropylene, it's very, very different.
What changes this? How do we get out of this rut from your perspective?
Yeah. I wish I knew the answer to
Yeah, no.
to be honest, Justin.
I'm in the
because-
same boat. Like,
Yeah, because if
I don't
had
see
the,
any change anytime soon. Is
Yeah.
kind of what I see. But
Yeah, I think it's going to come from demand. To
Yeah.
be honest, it'll come from, consumer demand, and then, there are so many great brands that have made some really strong pledges on recycled content, and increasing recycled content, and if demand stays strong and they can meet those targets, then that'll be the pull through. But I think, I just think the economics at the moment are really, really tough.
Yeah.
We're seeing that even, globally with shipping. 1 week you can, look, in the pandemic, that was definitely the worst for global shipping. But at the moment we're seeing, real struggle for repositioning of shipping containers, because if you imagine that there was a trade surplus of containers going in one direction, say from China to the US, and that's not there now, those containers now have to be going into a market somewhere else. So you've got this constant, pull and pull on where those, trade assets are having to be deployed. So, they're all interlinked. And then you throw on top of that the currency fluctuations. It's a really interesting time.
I keep hearing lower for longer. That's what I keep hearing from a virgin perspective. And if
Yep.
that's the case, I don't see how it changes for recycled anytime
Yeah.
soon. And then you mentioned the brands, like certain brands are wholly focused on this, and I agree. But I'm seeing a lot of brands backtrack right now
there's a lot of that. Yes.
because
Yep.
they're seeing, and a lot of people are hiding behind inflation and saying, well, I can't afford to pay for recycled content. And then in my mind, I say, well, then stop talking about it. Stop saying that you're going to have 25% recycled content. Stop putting that market signal out there if you don't truly believe in this. And you're going to have to eat some margin. And, that's probably not the most, your shareholders probably aren't going to love that. And there's a reason why you're not going to do that. But then stop sending out the market signal that you care about it. And it's this double-edged sword, right? Like, we don't want people to backtrack, but at the same time, we don't want them to virtue signal either, because then that's just going to cause more people to go bankrupt. And it's this weird space right now where I'm worried. I got to be honest.
Yeah, look, I'm really worried. I mean, look, we've seen in California in the last few weeks, really big PET plant has
Our planet
closed.
Earth. I had people that I knew that wored there, and that's just
Yep.
nobody wants that.
No, absolutely not. And come back to the point. I know some of the people there too, and again, the industry has great passionate people. We can't afford to lose those people. We can't afford to lose assets like that. So it's so important that we are doing everything we can to keep this ship on the same path. One of the things here in Australia is we've got two big retailers that dominate the market here, and whenever I talk to anyone in the supply chain, they're all telling me that, well, look, the supermarket chains want us to use recycled content, but they don't want to pay it because they don't want to put it onto the consumer. So, there are these constant discussions where they're going to the supply chain saying, we need you to have recycled content at this level, but by the way, we're not paying for it, you are. And, I guess...
And then the question becomes, does the consumer actually care?
Well, that's...
In Australia, do you think they do?
Yeah, I do think they do in Australia. Yep, I really do. Are they willing to pay an absolute premium on things? I just look at my own family, and when in the current economic times, you do start looking at different things that, okay, are we spending too much money on this or on that? So I think everyone is in the same boat there. But if you think about the staples in life, like a milk jug, If that milk, if the cost of a 2 liter of milk, was $4.50 and it's going to go up to $5.50 for that same 2 liters of milk, I mean, that's a big price increase on a daily staple that most families use. So, that's part of the challenge there too.
And then you got people trying to push us back to reuse models for milk, like that $4 to $5.50 becomes $6.50.
Yeah.
And then you got to clean it. I just don't see that happening. As much as I think that would be beneficial in some cases. I don't know the carbon emissions for reusing glass versus and how many times you got to reuse it without it breaking for it to make sense. But there's just so much about this that it's like, I think we have solutions for it. And then as soon as I feel like we have solutions for it, the market changes. And then people backtrack and they're like, I don't know if we want to do that. And
it's look, in our business, we often always, in our business, when I talk to other people in our field, you often, joke about, there's always something that comes along to kick in the balls.
And it really does.
And so just when you think the system's right and it's functioning, you get a curveball that, completely decimates. I mean, I was looking at the data from the CRV scheme in California, and I was looking at the pricing on the CRV bottles over the last, 5 or 6 years. And, there has been some big drops on prices. The astounding thing is when the market crashes, it crashes by 50%. It plummets within 85 days, but the recovery is well over 200 days. Mm-hmm. And it's that.
It's all stuck in the supply chain.
Yeah. It makes it tough.
And then you have Asian recycled content. And for the people that are listening to this, I'm using air quotes because, once again, I don't know if this recycled material coming in from Asia is actually recycled material. And it's being dumped here cheaper than even currently low virgin prices. So then that just makes it so folks like our planet Earth can't compete because they've got that everything's coming through the system and everything that's in the system is expensive right now. And then you got our pet being sold 10 cents less than virgin that's being imported. How does that make sense? Somebody's got to start asking questions about the prices that we're getting from Asia, because at some point, the little guy in the back of your head that says, can this be real? Starts screaming a little bit louder, because we know what it costs to collect this stuff. We know what it costs to make the pellet. So how is it that they're selling all day long at less than cost? It makes no sense.
Yeah, so I think if you look at the economic movers behind some of that, in different, I'll give you an example at the moment from Australia as well. So Australian government put in a rule that, you can't export bales of LDP film to Asia. So now you've got to make LDP resin. Mm-hmm. And so as soon as you start making a resin, you're putting a flag in the air now to say, okay, we're going to have to compete on the international market for whatever we can't use here. Our nearest neighbours in Southeast Asia can make it a lot cheaper than we can in Australia because their cost of labour's lower.
Yep.
The economics, the economy is, there are more economic needles there that are operational costs and things like that are a lot lower than us. So the Australian recyclers that have invested in LDP film recycling are struggling to sell that resin overseas, because if you're going to sell it to Asia, well, you're going to have to be at the same price point as they've got. And that's just global economics.
And then those Asians are selling the material to the U.S. at a price that's less than what it costs them to make it. It's like, how does this work? we
Yeah,
have to
it's
find a way to protect your local recyclers. Because
yeah,
like what you guys are trying to do is the right thing,
yep,
but then you can't compete on the global market because your cost profile is different. And then
yeah,
you're not getting a subsidy from the government like somebody in China is, because they don't need to make a margin. They just need to produce. And if they produce, they get a kickback from the government. So it doesn't matter if they're selling for less than their cost. How do you
yeah.
compete with that?
Oh, it's a real challenge.
Yeah.
It's a real challenge. I mean, look, there are GRS and RCS certifications, on supply chains. There are, some very strong producers of great products in Southeast Asia with all the right certifications on flakes
I don't
and
trust those
yeah,
certifications,
and
though.
and resin.
Honestly, how many times I've seen audits where the auditor never goes to the facility, just
Mm,
gets a spreadsheet and then says, we're good. Like,
yeah,
no, that's supposed to be a supply chain audit. You can't just get a spreadsheet and then say you're good.
no, you can't do that, and
That kind of stuff
that
happens all the time, though, on these
yeah.
third party things. It's a boondoggle. You just get money.
Yeah, actually it's a big talking point around, there's so many different certifications to have.
Yeah.
Which one's the right one? I mean, in Europe they're talking about Resi class, and then you've
Which
got
is a good one. I
yeah,
will say that they do a good job.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So that's another factor. And then if we come back to the you know the situation in California, that for the 12-month probably prior to the market coming down. I mean, some of those CRV PET bottles were getting like 40 cents a pound, and they were going, I believe, down into Mexico,
Yes,
and
a lot of it did.
yeah, and so it's the feedstock cost when it gets out of control like that is super hard. And I think that's where it became and has been tough for the local processors when you get this massive competition on feedstock, and it just continues to drive that price up. We saw it on milk jugs as well recently, and I mean that's come back a fair bit now. But yeah, it's this whole demand and supply that's just totally out of line, and that's probably why we need everyone at the table together.
Yeah. So we could talk about this for hours. I do want to do this again. I
Yeah, it'd
do
be
want to
awesome,
have you
mate.
on again to talk about some bigger topics. Global trade, I think, is because we just started to scratch the surface on that. And I think
Yeah,
we could have a whole other hour just on that. But what I love to do at the end of every episode is give the guest whatever you want to talk about that we haven't covered today. Floor is yours.
well, I mean, look, first of all, Justin, yeah, I'd love to come back on and talk more deeply about some of the markets, and I can be a bit more prepared with some numbers on some of that for you. Look, the easiest way to get in touch with me is you can find me on LinkedIn quite easily. You can find anything out about Vanden on LinkedIn or YouTube. Instagram, you can find me there. Sometimes I'll post a lot of stuff about when I am traveling, the little behind the scenes stuff, little bits and pieces like that. But look, I guess the closing thing I would say, Justin, is what I've learned in the last 2 years, especially coming over to the US, is how welcoming everyone has been, and how passionate everyone is there to try and do the right thing. And as an outsider looking in, the intentions for everyone are in the right place, and you can see that it's about just getting everyone together and trying to put everyone around the same table and pull something together. So I think, yeah, that would be the closing thing that I really think about a lot. Every time I'm over there, the companies that welcome us in with open arms, and the people in the industry, that's been amazing.
So I lost you for a second there. Hopefully it's going to still upload. And honestly, I thought this went really well from a technical perspective for the fact that
Yeah,
we're so far away. And if we only lost a couple seconds at the end, I think we're in pretty good shape. But Thanks. I really appreciate this. I thought this was a great conversation. Really looking forward to talking to you again. I've been talking for months about getting a roundtable together, and I think it would make a ton of sense to have regional recycling people. And we can talk about, what are we doing here? What are we doing there? How can we share best practices to make recycling work better globally? I think that would be a fun conversation that I'd love to have you involved in. This has been the Redefining Plastics Podcast for my guest, Simon Van Leuven from Vanden Recycling. Really appreciate it. Everybody have a great night. If you want to learn more about the plastics industry, recycling, check out these other videos. Please like and subscribe.